start right now.
Okay, Andres, as you know, you have 30 minutes to present. After your presentation, your guests, no guests, you will stay for the questions. So you guys will have to leave for the questions and you'll be answered by the questions. You can start.
Right now. Okay, welcome everyone. Here I'm going to present my research study, which is to student perception, feelings, and intention to communicate by using ESP methodology in English class. The setting of my study is the following. My study was developed here at Santo Tomás University with the course of Basic 2, composed by 26 students that use ESP as a methodology for teaching English. I started to look at other studies and I realized that there are several studies based on ESP methodology, but all of them were used a quantitative approach. So I started to wonder, what are the student perception of using English to communicate in ESP class? Regarding this, the purpose of my study is to determine the student perception of using ESP regarding their context and their personal opinion, but also the affective factors and social factors that we can identify in these points. For this, I prepared the following objectives. The first one is to understand the student perception of using English in ESP class. In order to achieve this objective, I proposed 3 main steps, which are to identify the social cultural factors which are involved during the initial exposition of ESP, identify the possible affective factors which are related to the student perception, such as motivation, anxiety, fears, in order to speak English in an ESP class. And also, I have to analyze the student constructed perception of using ESP in order to communicate. For this study, I expect the following. First, the students share their opinions regarding their feelings and by using this methodology. Also, the perception displayed a positive impact of using ESP as a methodology for teaching English. And finally, the students demonstrate the possible drawbacks of applying ESP methodology here in the university with others. This study contains 5 main key concepts, which are perceptions, willingness to communicate, ESP, affective factors, and social-cultural factors. For perception, we can find 2 authors there, about Tabate and Morgan, that explain that in order to determine the effectiveness of ESP, we have to bear in mind the perception of the students. But also, Leslie defined ESP, perception, as a word of different aspects presented in our context, which are perceived by physical sensation. These are reflected in the specific objective, which is to analyze the student constructed perception of using ESP to communicate. Also, we have willingness to communicate, defined by McIntyre, where we can see that willingness to communicate is the predisposition that students possess in order to speak and talk in English inside of the class. Also, we have social-cultural factors that are presented by Brown and Alfaro. That Brown explained that in order to learn a second language, is necessary to bear in mind the context of the students, but also Alfaro explained that in order to achieve and develop knowledge, it's necessary to have the content of students, but also their previous experience. These are presented in this objective. This is to identify the social-cultural factors which are involved during the initial exposition of ESP. And then we have affective factors that are also explained by Brown, that they presented in order to achieve or learn a language. It's necessary to bear in mind the anxiety of the students or take control of the class itself to provide a good environment. That's also defined by the affective filtering hypothesis developed by Crusher. And finally, we have English for specific purposes. We can understand this by reaching a speech that has a methodology which is considered different from ordinary language. Why? Because the students are more direct towards the immediate professional or academic demands and applicable situations. So this is more specific than other methodologies. From this is proposed the following. This is a quantitative approach. I said before, in constructed other study, that is quantitative. It's based on the analysis of subjective data, also contain an interpretative paradigm, which is the analysis of the context of the students, Also explained by Kawandu and Hamza that the predatic paradigm is a concern with understanding the world and is formed subjective experience of individuals. And also we have an ethnographic design, which is explained by Crosswell, as an ethnographic is a quantitative design in which the researcher describes and interprets the shared and learned patterns of value, behaviors, belief, and language and culture sharing groups. The scenario I described before is the English Basic 2 course developed by 26 students, and they use ESP methodology. The procedure for this was the application of 3 main instruments that were field notes at first, the application of 4 field notes taken from the C14 rooms from 2 p.m. to 3:30, and the main categories for these field notes to observe was the student interaction by using English, the disposition to talk by using English, and the student reaction to ESP activities. Also, it contained a journal, personal journal, that is developed in 3 main tasks, also developed in Spanish. This was delivered by Google Forms, and right after the class has ended. The objective of this were first to identify the effective factors of using English to communicate, then also to identify the difficulty of using English to communicate, and finally to identify the progress of the student by using English inside of the classroom. This is the example class. And then we have focus group. Third material was developed with 6 students that were selected previously by bearing in mind their activity inside of the classroom, proactive, more passive roles, and also is developed in 4 main questions in Spanish. Also was developed in an English center and facility provided by the university. Here we have the objective for the focus group, which were to elicit previous experience by taking an English course, then to elicit the utility of English given by them, and to identify the previous use of English in order to communicate, and finally to identify the student use, how a student use the language to communicate. The analysis for this data was by categorization. As we know in previous courses, I used the same template that Rodriguez, Gil, and Garcia and Galeano, who provide the categorization of information through columns, from the more general aspect to the more specific one, and also assigning them a code or suggest comments. Here's the sample of my categorization method. We have the category, the description, and also the code I was mentioned before. We're going to triangulate the information as this, where we can find a group of codes, also a summary or a sentence that can sum up all the information for the group, and also to the conclusion that will be a help in order to provide our findings and our conclusion at the end of the research. From this, I found the following. First, from group A, I could identify that meaningful activities are based in their context. Also, ESP activities provide the students meaningful activities. So, activities are connected with their context, so they feel that a person is. From group B, I can find the social factor involved in learning and using English to communicate. Especially, the teacher represents a motivating factor inside of the classroom. Why? Because he encourages students to use English by providing them ESP activities. Also, they don't have a previous experience before taking English course, and peer feedback is presented there, and also social networks. From group C, this code presents the following: that resource used for learning English. Also, the presence of cell phones is very common inside the classroom. The peer correction is very important there, and also this, the collaborative learning, which is explained by Pierre and Samarishu. That's a collaborative learning. It's a situation in which 2 or more people learn or attempt to learn something together. From group D, I found these affective factors involved in learning using English to communicate, where the most important one was anxiety. It's very common to find anxiety inside the class because this methodology is new for them, so they feel that something is different. Also, the new methodology, as I said before, and the comfort zone in which they are. Then, as a conclusion, I can find this. The specific objective, the first one, that was to identify the social cultural factors which are involved during the initial exposition in ESP. I found that they didn't have experience in using English to communicate. Also, that English is very important for them because it's helping them to their professional area to get or work in multinational companies, but also to get better incomes and plays a cultural contribution because they feel that they're connected with the world by using English. And the second specific objective we can find to identify possible affective factors which are related to student perceptions such as motivation, fears, anxiety in order to speak English in an ESP class. We find anxiety. As I said before, this is the feeling that they live and experience during the class. Also, the role of the teacher, as I said before, is very important. But it can help them and encourage them to use English and came out of the comfort zone. They can take risks by using ESP. I can never write that. It's very different from other methodologies. And also they have fun because they see the implication of learning a new language. They can see that they can use the language. So they are having fun and also learning. Then we have a specific objective 3 that is to analyze the student construct perception of using ESP to communicate. We have 2 points here. Before ESP, English was only observed or perceived as a social language for listening music and watching movies, and it was not necessary at all. But then, by using ESP as a methodology, we will find this. They can see the benefit of using of acquiring English in the academic and professional areas. Also, we have that it's a social language. It's 19. They can use to communicate, but also it's a language we represent. It can perceive in their context. They're familiar with it. It's not, as they say before, it's not necessary. Now it's necessary. They can use it. They can feel it. Finally, the general objective, which is the answer to our question, is to understand the student perception. We can see that ESP is a motivating methodology in order to learn English. Also have real implication. We can use the English. Thanks to ESP methodology, we can perceive English around us. And how Brown explained, it's very important to connect context with the English that we are teaching. Because by this connection, and I said before, we can provide meaningful learning and we can provide knowledge. And also the vocabulary, grammar, and objective are meaningful. And the role of the teacher is very important in order to provide ESP activities and encourage them to get out of the comfort zone and feel connected with the language. My limitation was this, a specific context. We are talking about an ESP course here in the university that could be very different in other contexts because we have personal opinion of the students. This is something that differs from others. If we apply this in other contexts, we can obtain different data. But the contribution, as I said before, and the benefit of using ESP with others is very, very good. We have the comfortable environment for them. We have the meaningful learning. Also, we have the context which is related with them, and the professional benefits that they get by learning this, by using this methodology. My suggestion for this is apply this methodology in a different area, like primary education, like initial education, and also with teenagers, because we can see the benefit of this and they can perceive also. Now, in the second part of the presentation, my metacognitive analysis is the internship. I can identify this stretch that I become reflective, proactive, and creative. This methodology was new for me. During all the year, I started to learn more about this. And I think that I become more creative because I started to think in my student and not myself. So I become different from what I was before. But my weaknesses is that I didn't have experience with others. And I don't like to teach others. So that is my personal preference. I prefer to teach kids too because I feel connected with them, I can play with them, I have fun with them. But with others it's very difficult and very different for me. So as a challenge, it was to face anxiety because when I'm teaching something with others, they show a poker face. So I don't know what to do, how to react. So that is my challenge, and take control of my class during my intervention. As a research, I think that it became reflective, proactive, also attack I took a passing course. This is a weakness at the beginning, because as I said before, my personality is very active. I tend to move a lot. So it's very difficult for me to be stand and quiet. So as a weakness, it's starting to be a challenge. And then I think that it becomes a strength to take a passing course inside the classroom. And also a challenge for me in a research study is to apply this methodology and study this methodology with kids in initial education on primary schools. That will be very nice. This is my reference. Thank you so much for your attention. To these.